This is your final exam review, Part 4, Psychology 2301, Departmental Final, Chapters 7 and 8. The section of Chapter 7 that will be covered for your final is Stress and Health. Objective number 1 on Stress and Health asks you to describe the stages of the General Adaptation Syndrome. Selye's General Adaptation Syndrome described 3 separate stages to the long-term stress. Initially, your body undergoes an alarm reaction when stress hormones are released. You'll get an elevation in heart rate, blood pressure, production of adrenaline, etc. Following this initial alarm reaction, your body needs to maintain itself and can't maintain itself at that high level, so it begins to put up a type of resistance. You adapt to the stress. Your blood pressure may increase slightly, as well as other signs that you're adapting but still showing signs of stress. During this resistance phase, your body and your personality may appear to be functioning normally. However, there may be long-term damage that's occurring to your body as it attempts to resist the effects of stress. In addition to blood pressure, there may be changes in the digestive system, changes in the central nervous system, changes in the endocrine system, and changes in other bodily functions that can produce long-term damage. If stress continues, you may reach the exhaustion stage. Here your reserves are gone. The high blood pressure has started to cause damage to your heart and cardiovascular system. You may have a heart attack, stroke, or other signs of exhaustion that your body simply can't continue. Your immune system may have been overproducing for so long that you lose immunity and you develop chronic illnesses. Organ failure, kidney failure, liver failure also may result during the exhaustion phase of your reaction to long-term stress. Extreme or life-threatening stressful events can cause your mental processes to be overwhelmed as well. This is known as post-traumatic stress syndrome. Typically, it was initially described in reference to war experiences, rape, and other severe life-threatening situations like natural disasters. Some of the symptoms of post-traumatic stress syndrome include extreme anxiety, insomnia, perhaps due to nightmares, persistent intrusive thoughts, where during a normal waking day the person may have flashbacks, emotional problems, in particular in relation to relationships, frequently divorce, other problems with relationships. The individual might find themselves unable to concentrate, unable to go about the business of daily living because of the intrusive thoughts and the emotional problems. In general, this is extremely disruptive and may persist for many years. Substance abuse and family problems are also common responses to post-traumatic stress syndrome. Objective number 3 asks you to explain the difference between problem-focused and emotion-focused coping. Regardless of whether your stress is physical or psychological, coping mechanisms are important in helping you deal with that stress. For some individuals and some situations, problem-focused coping is best. With problem-focused coping, you're trying to change the situation or problem that's causing the stress. Your job's causing the stress. You may resort to talking with your boss about the situation. In extreme situations, perhaps even quitting your job. If the problem is at school, again, you may talk to your professor, may drop a class, may decide to major in something differently. You're focused on the particular problem itself, and you're trying to change that situation or problem. With emotion-focused coping, you're accepting the fact that the problem is going to exist, and instead you're trying to reduce the effects of stress by controlling your emotions. You might use meditation, you might use music, you might use art, drawing, some other type of hobby that helps you relax. You're trying to control your own emotional response to the stress rather than the stressful situation itself. Different types of coping work better in different situations, and different individuals have different coping styles. Psychologists are not only interested in the effects of stress, they're interested in the causes of stress as well. Objective number 4 asks you to explain the purpose and structure of the social readjustment rating scale. Objective number 5, to describe the impact of daily hassles on stress and health. The Social Readjustment Rating Scale measures the effects of various life events on your stress response. These may be major life events, things like marriage, divorce, death of a spouse, as well as more routine but still significant life events like taking a vacation or changing jobs. These life events are rated for their stress potential, and they find in research studies that cumulative life events in a short period of time may result in a stress reaction that is predictive for illness and accidents. Daily hassles are also predictive for physical and mental illness and the effects of stress. Daily hassles are minor events. You have an argument with your significant other, you lose your keys, there's a traffic delay on the way to work. These events can also cause physical and emotional stress and problems. Objective number 6 asks that you describe the effects of stress on the immune system. Listed as key terms are the biopsychosocial model, health psychology, and psychoneuroimmunology. Stress has an effect not only on your cardiovascular system, digestive system, endocrine system, but also on your immune system. Your immune system affects whether or not you get sick from some of the minor illnesses, things like colds, the flu, as well as major illnesses like cancer. The biopsychosocial model is used to explain the effects of stress as an interactive variable. In other words, stress is going to include, or the study of stress is going to include explanations of interactions between the biological, psychological, and social variables. Biological variables such as how strong your immune system is, psychological variables, how you perceive stressful situations, social variables, what's going on in your environment that causes you stress. For example, the relationships that you're in or the stress you're experiencing at work. Objective 7 asks that you list the factors that influence an individual's capacity for resisting the effects of stress. Obviously, not everyone experiences stress in the same way. Some return from war perfectly healthy and able to go back to their normal lives. Others suffer from post-traumatic stress syndrome. Others come back with a variety of physical illnesses related to the stress that they've experienced. Some of the reasons for these differences are, first of all, the age of the person. Younger people, in general, are more resilient than older people. Exercise is important. The condition of your body when you experience the stress helps determine how long you're able to resist the effects of that stress and when you're going to fall into the exhaustion stage. Your diet, if you have the correct nutrients, you're less likely to experience a breakdown than you are if your body is struggling just to maintain itself in terms of the neurotransmitters and the physical strength that you need in order to resist stress. Social support is an important variable. As depicted in the slide, support refers to the physical support that others offer you. For example, somebody to help you take care of the yard, the house, your kids, somebody to help you study. It also includes the emotional support, somebody to listen to you, somebody to give you advice. Social support is extremely important in being able to resist stress. Your overall state of health is also important. If you have an underlying health condition, whether that be high blood pressure, diabetes, you're much less likely to withstand the effects of stress than someone who's in relatively good health. Genetics also plays a factor. You can't do a whole lot about it, but certain illnesses, certain organ system weaknesses, and even certain mental problems run in families genetically. This makes the person more likely to break down under stress if they have the genetic predisposition to do so. Chapter 8 in your textbook on personality overlaps with the 6th section of your Student Supplemental Handbook. Learning objective number 1 in section 6, chapter 8, is to define personality. Personality is defined as an individual's consistent pattern of feeling, thinking, and behavior. It's what makes that person recognizably themselves. Objective number 2 asks you to describe the processes that take place in the conscious, unconscious, and preconscious mind. Freud likened the human mind to an iceberg where the majority, 90%, lie beneath the surface. Your unconscious mind, which contains information outside of your awareness, memories that you have repressed, emotions that you're not aware of, things that are not accessible to you on a regular day-to-day basis. He believed that this was the majority of what was going on in your mind, and that there was an ongoing or dynamic confrontation and negotiation between different parts of your mind and psyche. So your unconscious mind is outside your awareness. Your preconscious mind is information that you're not currently aware of, but since these thoughts are just below the surface, you can become aware of them at any point in time very easily. In addition, you have your conscious mind. These are the thoughts that you're aware of in the present, information that you're currently processing. Objective number 3 asks you to define and identify the functions of the id, ego, and superego, and to define reality principle and pleasure principle. The id, ego, and superego are the 3 components of the personality that I described earlier as being in dynamic conflict with each other. The id, according to Freud, represents those instinctive or primitive impulses that enable you to obtain pleasure or satisfaction. These impulses are generally unconscious and include things like hunger and sex. The ego, which develops slightly later in the child's developmental processes, is a conscious part of the brain. This is the decision maker, the part of your brain that enables you to deal with reality, the reality principle, in order to figure out how to satisfy the id. In addition to figuring out how to satisfy the id, the ego must balance or weigh the needs of the id, those primitive impulses like sex and hunger, with the dictates of the superego. The superego is your conscience, the voice of the parent, the voice of moral authority in society within your head. It's unconscious because you're generally not aware of why you're feeling guilty about something or why you feel the need to do the right thing even though it's personally uncomfortable or causes you personal problems. This is your sense of morality, the constraints of society. The ego has to balance between those constraints, between those ideas of morality and the impulses of the id. The id says, sex is great, I want some, let's have it now. Your superego says, no, it's not the right time, you need to wait, you need to find the right person and be with that person and follow the laws of marriage with that person in order to make the sex correct. The ego has to deal realistically with, how can I have it the best of both worlds? What can I do in order to have a relationship to meet the needs of society, but at the same time to satisfy the needs of myself, my personal needs for sexuality? Freud believed that some of these unconscious demands on the individual caused anxiety, and that the ego, on occasion, needed to use defense mechanisms in order to deal with that anxiety. Defense mechanisms allowed the individual to distort the truth somewhat in order to defend itself against anxiety. For example, a defense mechanism of rationalization. The individual feels like, I want to eat that whole chocolate cake. That's the id talking. The superego says, no, you shouldn't do that. That's wrong. Nobody should eat that much chocolate cake at one sitting. The ego figures out a way of saying, well, it's okay, I'll just have one piece, but then I'll go exercise afterwards. It justifies the behavior in order to deal with the anxiety, but it also may be slightly distorting the truth, since probably the person has no real intention of running afterwards. There are a number of different defense mechanisms mentioned in your text, but for purposes of the final exam, you just need to know what a defense mechanism is. It's a way of the ego defending yourself against anxiety by slightly distorting the truth. Objective number 5 asks you to summarize the characteristics of each of Freud's psychosexual stages. There were 5 of these stages that Freud believed were developmentally descriptive of what the person went through during their life. The oral stage, the stage of infancy, is one of dependency and oral gratification, taking in food, and later on biting or chewing on things, receiving satisfaction orally. The anal stage, this stage is the stage during which the child is toilet trained, also usually the stage in which the child is spanked on the buttocks, focuses on the anal area and on control, both self-control and who's going to be in control of the household. The phallic stage, the preschool child, early childhood 3 to 6, is when the attraction to the opposite sex develops. By 3, the child figures out whether they're a boy or girl and recognizes they're going to stay that way, but they don't really have a very good sense of time. The little boy might say, "Mom, I'm going to marry you when I grow up." By the time he's 6 years old, the same little boy recognizes that he's going to grow up to be big like Dad, but he can't have Mom, and instead, by identifying with Dad, he can find someone just like Mom. And that process of identification is characteristic of early childhood. Elementary school years are characterized by psychosexual latency. Freud believed that you consolidated your sex role identity by associating with people of the same sex. The little boys hang out with other little boys. The little girls band together with other little girls. The boys learn to be like the men in their lives or the male models they're exposed to, and the little girls imitate the females. The final stage, genital sexuality, or adult mature sexuality, Freud believed represented the stage after puberty when the primary focus or the primary motivation for adults, this is a Darwinian biological need for reproduction philosophy, the primary need is sexuality, and what you do in life is impress the opposite sex in order to obtain a relationship with them. This is the genital stage, mature adult sexuality. Trait theory is a more research-based approach to personality, and it involves labeling personality characteristics based on their frequency or their dominance in an individual and in the population. The Big Five model, or 5-factor model of personality, says that there are basically 5 cardinal traits or underlying trait dimensions that are stable over time, shared cross-culturally, and explain a substantial portion of your behavior. Traits are the relatively enduring characteristics that influence our behavior across many situations. The 5 traits listed in the Big Five model, the traits that they believe can incorporate most of the minor traits, these 5 traits include conscientiousness, which is a sense of responsibility, working things through to completion, agreeableness, general friendliness, neuroticism, which refers to anxiety, open to experience, which is somebody who is curious, wants to explore new things, try different things out, and extroversion, which is social gregariousness, wanting to be out in the world, doing things, particularly doing things with other people. Objective 7 asks you to explain the view of humanistic theorists regarding personality, and number 8 to explain the views of Abraham Maslow regarding self-actualization. Are somehow unique or special, they're not like other animals, as Freud would suggest, and that they can't be limited to trait descriptions such as the researchers would suggest. Instead, the idea here is that we have our own beliefs about who we are. We are responsible for changing those beliefs, that we can have positive or negative feelings about ourselves, but if we have self-esteem, we're more or better integrated and a better person within ourselves, more psychologically successful within ourselves. One particular humanistic psychologist, Abraham Maslow, developed a hierarchy of needs in which he used the concept of self-actualization to represent human motivation to reach our full potential. He believed that human needs are arranged in a hierarchy. Our physiological needs are primary. We have to eat, we have to sleep. Safety needs come next, we need to protect ourselves. Then comes the need for love and belonging, which we can focus on once the safety and physiological needs have been met. Then the need for self-esteem. This is the need that the theory or the therapy of humanists focuses in on. And then finally, self-actualization, something he believed very few people accomplish, but when they do accomplish it, reaching their full potential, it's usually after a lifetime of work, a lifetime of living up to their potential by doing something that involves self-sacrifice and focus on the world in general. Objective number 9 asks you to explain the evidence for and against the view that personality is inherited. This basically describes a field called behavioral genetics, which includes the scientific research on heredity, environment, and the interaction between the two. On one level, twin studies, family studies, and adoption studies help psychologists isolate which variables are primarily hereditary, which are primarily environmental, and which are more complex, resulting either from an epigenetic or from a large-scale interaction between the two factors. Molecular genetics focuses more on the specifics of DNA, how that is inherited or transmitted from generation to generation, and which particular behavioral characteristics and mental illnesses are associated with either defects or differences in DNA. The term epigenetics refers to environmental influences on gene expression. In other words, you might inherit a gene, but that gene may or may not be expressed depending upon whether you've been exposed to that environmental influence. The environmental influence might be anything from a virus to a high-fat diet, but it does control whether or not the gene is expressed, and therefore may explain some of the differences between identical twins on some of the characteristics that they share in common genetically, but not behaviorally. The conclusion that researchers have reached in the field of behavioral genetics is that basically your environment and your genes interact to influence both your personality and your behavior. Objective number 10 asks that you explain the differences between objective personality tests or inventories and projective personality tests. Objective personality tests include personality inventories or questionnaires such as the MMPI that have true, false, or multiple choice questions where specific answers or patterns of answers are associated with a particular trait or diagnosis. For example, a diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder, depression, anxiety disorder might be associated with a particular pattern of responses to the questions on the MMPI. Projective tests, on the other hand, ask an individual to project meaning onto an ambiguous situation or stimuli. This might be a draw a person test, for example, where the individual is asked to draw a picture of a person, a house, and a tree. All they have to go on is what's in their mind, and they project those images, which have meaning according to psychodynamic psychologists, project those images onto a piece of paper. Two examples that are frequently used or considered in studying projective personality tests are the Rorschach, which is a series of ink blots, or the thematic apperception test, which is a series of pictures that the person is asked to tell a story about. The Rorschach and the TAT, thematic apperception test, are therefore both examples of projective tests where the individual projects their personality onto an ambiguous situation. And finally, in section number 9, Other Concepts of your Student Supplementary Handbook, is an objective that asks you to explain Bandura's reciprocal determinism. This is covered in the personality chapter in your current textbook. Bandura, if you recall, discussed social cognitive theory. In particular, his research focused on observational learning, but more completely focused on what the individual is thinking about when they're choosing to engage in certain behaviors. Bandura believed in a concept called reciprocal determinism. This is the idea that there is a complex interaction between an individual's personality, their environment, and their behavior. An anxious person, for example, may be more likely to seek out a secure or stable environment, and therefore within the context of that environment act in a very professional and relaxed manner. On the other hand, if that same individual with that anxious personality is placed in a different type of environment, perhaps joins the military and the military now sends him into combat rather than leaving him in an office job, his behavior may be very different, and this influence on his personality may cause a change in his personality. In addition, the changed personality may now find themselves seeking out different types of environment, and the new environments may again alter behavior and personality. The behaviors he engages in may affect the environment the personality. There's a complex interaction between all of these factors, according to Bandura's theory of reciprocal determinism. This is the end of Section 4, Final Exam Review.